The knife slides through the frosting, not to cut the cake, but to cut me out. My stepmother, Diane, smiles for the camera, all red lipstick and control, as she announces to the room full of guests, "Eli, 14 is old enough to stand on your own 2 feet." The guests laugh uncertainly, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. My father keeps his eyes fixed on the floor like he's searching for answers in the carpet fibers. There's an envelope in front of me instead of a birthday gift, crisp and white against the blue tablecloth. Inside are my emancipation papers, neatly typed and notarized. No more allowance. No inheritance rights. No home after tonight. Her voice drips with sugar and venom as she continues. "You'll learn responsibility faster this way, sweetheart." Everyone claps politely, uncertainly. I just sit there, staring at the cake with its white frosting and my name spelled out in blue icing, and feel the ground vanish beneath me. This is my 14th birthday party. This is the moment my childhood ends. I can't breathe properly. The air in the room feels thick, suffocating. It's not just the public humiliation burning my cheeks red. It's the precision of it all. She planned this moment down to the last detail, from the guest list to the timing of the announcement. I look at my father, silently begging him to intervene, to say something, anything. He finally meets my eyes and says softly, almost apologetically, "She's right, son. It's time you learn to be independent." That's the exact moment something inside me breaks, not loudly or dramatically, but cleanly like a bone snapping. I don't cry though tears press hot behind my eyes. I don't scream though rage builds in my chest. I just nod slowly, mechanically. Diane raises her champagne glass high, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "To new beginnings," she declares triumphantly. And I realize with sudden, cold clarity that I'll never have a new beginning unless I create it myself. The guests toast awkwardly. I taste ashes in my mouth. My name is Eli Parker, and I was 12 years old when Diane swept into our house like a perfumed storm. She arrived 6 months after my mother's funeral, moving in with designer luggage and an engagement ring that caught every ray of light. She came smelling like vanilla and victory, my father's new wife, fresh from what she called her business wins in real estate. I wanted desperately to like her. God knows I tried hard enough those first few months. I helped her unpack, complimented her cooking, stayed quiet when she rearranged all of Mom's things. But Diane had a philosophy she repeated constantly. "Nothing in this house comes free, Eli. Everything has a price." By the time my 14th birthday arrived, she transformed my life into a series of permission slips and negotiations. I needed approval for food beyond basic meals, for new clothes, for spending time with friends. And then, on that birthday, she took the only thing that was truly mine, access to my mother's trust fund, which she'd somehow convinced my father to let her manage. That night, after the guests left and the house fell silent, Diane stood in my bedroom doorway, watching me pack a small duffel bag with the few possessions I could carry. "Don't look so tragic," she said, her voice artificially sweet. "You'll thank me for this someday, Eli. I'm teaching you to be strong." I stuffed clothes into the bag without looking at her, my hands shaking with suppressed emotion. "Most boys your age are coddled weak. Not you. You're going to learn what the real world is like." She paused, examining her manicured nails. "Your father agrees this is best." I wanted to scream that my father would agree to anything she said, that he'd become a hollow version of himself since marrying her. Instead, I zipped the bag closed and walked past her without a word. She called after me as I descended the stairs. "The door locks at midnight. Choose wisely." I walked out into the rain with no money, no real plan, just a cold, quiet fury burning in my chest like a pilot light. Behind me, I heard the door click shut, then the deadbolt sliding into place. I crashed in my best friend Marcus's basement for the first 3 months. His mother, Mrs. Chun, asked no questions when Marcus explained I needed a place to stay. She just set up a cot, brought down extra blankets, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I got a job washing dishes at an all-night diner 6 blocks from school, working from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. 3 nights a week, then going straight to class on 2 hours of sleep. Every coin I earned went into a small notebook I kept hidden in my duffel. I labeled it Lessons and started writing down everything I learned. Lesson 1. Written in shaky handwriting that first week. Never beg someone who enjoys your weakness. Lesson 2. Money is freedom. Lesson 3. Remember everything. Every slight, every theft, every moment of cruelty. I worked until my hands cracked and bled from the industrial soap. I studied until the words blurred on the page. And every single day, I thought about Diane's smile as she handed me those emancipation papers. My school counselor, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed the exhaustion bruises under my eyes during a mandatory check-in 4 months after I left home. They weren't from violence, but from bone-deep weariness that comes from working nights and studying days. "Eli," she said quietly, closing her office door, "I need you to be honest with me. Are you safe?" I told her everything, the words spilling out in a monotone that surprised me with its flatness. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she made 3 phone calls while I sat there. By the end of the week, she'd helped me secure a full scholarship to a prestigious boarding school 2 hours away. It offered room, board, and a stipulation I could work in their library to earn spending money. "You're too smart to waste your potential washing dishes," Ms. Rodriguez said, handing me the acceptance letter. When I left town that August with everything I owned in 2 bags, Diane didn't say goodbye. She didn't even know I was leaving. But I learned later she'd already sold my mother's jewelry collection, the pieces Mom had specifically left for me in her will. At 16, during my first summer break from boarding school, I drove delivery trucks for a local logistics company. The routes were long, spanning 3 states sometimes, which meant extended periods of solitude and time to think. I drove through sunrise and sunset, through small towns and sprawling cities, delivering packages while my mind worked through calculations and plans. Every red light became a moment of reminder. You owe her nothing, but she owes you everything. The money I earned that summer went into my first investment account. Just $300 initially, but it felt like planting a seed. I read investment books during my breaks, studied market patterns on my phone at truck stops, learned everything I could about building wealth. My boarding school roommate, James, thought I was obsessed. "You're 16, he'd say, watching me read financial reports instead of playing video games. Live a little. But I couldn't explain the fire that drove me. How every dollar earned was a small victory. Every lesson learned was ammunition for a war only I knew I was fighting. I didn't want revenge at first. That's the truth. In those early months after being cut off, I only wanted survival. I wanted to prove I could make it without her, without my father's weak enabling, without anyone's pity or help. But everything changed the day I found a news article during my junior year at boarding school. I was researching successful entrepreneurs for a class project when I stumbled across it. Local businesswoman launches Parker Properties development firm. There was Diane, photographed in front of a new office building, looking triumphant. The article detailed her innovative startup funding and family investment backing. My hand shook as I read further. The startup capital amount matched my mother's trust fund exactly, down to the last dollar. She hadn't just taken control of the money. She'd stolen it, used it to launch her own empire while I washed dishes and drove trucks to afford textbooks. That's when the fire that had been quietly burning inside me roared into an inferno. That's when survival strategy transformed into something else entirely. Something patient, something cold. Something absolutely focused on destroying everything she'd built on my mother's stolen legacy. I chose finance as my college major with surgical precision. Numbers made perfect sense to me in ways people never did. Every equation balanced. Every calculation had a definitive answer. Every problem had a solution if you were patient and methodical enough. At State University, I devoured courses in corporate finance, investment strategy, and forensic accounting. My professors praised my analytical mind, my ability to spot patterns in financial data that others missed. What they didn't know was that everything I learned, every skill I developed, I imagined using against Diane someday. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college, tutoring business students, managing a professor's research data, and doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. I lived in the cheapest housing available, ate ramen more meals than not, and banked every extra dollar. By my senior year, I'd saved $30,000. My classmates spent their weekends partying. I spent mine studying market trends and building investment portfolios. They thought I was boring and asocial. I didn't care. I was building a weapon. My finance professor, Mr. Callahan, pulled me aside after class one afternoon during my senior year. He was a former hedge fund manager who'd retired to teach, and he had a reputation for being brutally honest. "Parker," he said, studying me with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, "you're the best student I've had in 15 years. You think like a chess player, always 3 moves ahead." He paused, leaning against his desk. "But you're driven by something beyond success. What is it?" I considered lying, then decided on a version of the truth. "Someone took something from me. I intend to take it back with interest." He nodded slowly, understanding flickering across his face. "Revenge is expensive, Parker. Make sure the cost is worth it." Then he handed me a business card. "When you're ready to enter the real world, call this number. They're looking for someone with your particular talents." The card read, "Callahan Consulting, Strategic Financial Analysis." I kept it in my wallet like a talisman. Mr. Callahan had no idea he was helping me forge the very tool I'd use to dismantle Diane's empire. But I knew. I'd always known exactly what I was building toward. I started investing seriously during my final semester of college. Just small amounts at first, a few $100s in carefully researched stocks, but I studied every transaction like a battlefield strategy. I analyzed market patterns, read annual reports until I could recite them, tracked corporate movements with obsessive detail. Some investments failed. Most succeeded. By 22, 3 months after graduation and 6 weeks into my first real job at a mid-sized investment firm, I turned my college savings into 6 figures. Not millions, not yet, but enough to matter, enough to build on. The money stayed quiet, invisible, spread across different accounts and investment vehicles that wouldn't draw attention. My apartment was deliberately modest. My car was 10 years old. My clothes were professional but unremarkable. I lived below my means while my net worth grew steadily in the shadows. My name wasn't loud yet in the financial world. I was just another young analyst grinding away at a desk, sending reports up the chain, keeping my head down. But I could feel the power accumulating, patient and cold. And I knew, eventually, it would echo loud enough for Diane to hear. I returned home for the first time in 7 years to attend my father's 60th birthday party. Diane had organized it at their house, the same house I'd been forced out of, now renovated and expanded with money from her thriving development company. When I walked through the door in my tailored suit, carrying an expensive bottle of scotch, Diane's eyes widened with genuine surprise. "Eli," she exclaimed, rushing over with arms extended. "Look at you. You've grown into such a handsome man." Her tone was sugar slick, as if we were old friends reuniting instead of a thief and her victim. I smiled back, the expression perfectly calculated. "Diane, you look successful." She preened visibly, gesturing around at the marble foyer and designer furniture. "Business has been wonderful. Parker Properties is expanding to 3 new markets this quarter." She touched my arm conspiratorially. "You should come work for me. I could use someone with your intelligence." I made appropriate noises, asked polite questions about her business, complimented her achievements, all while taking mental notes of everything. The expensive artwork, the casual mention of investors, the way she name-dropped politicians and business leaders. Every detail went into my mental database, filed away for future use. My father looked older, grayer, smaller somehow. When he hugged me, he whispered, "I'm sorry, son." I said nothing, just patted his back and moved on to greeting other guests. The party ended at midnight. I drove away with pages of notes in my head. It took 3 weeks of digging through public records, business filings, and property databases to map out the full structure of Parker Properties. Diane's empire looked impressive on the surface. 12 commercial developments for residential projects, partnerships with major construction firms. But underneath, the foundation was shakier than she wanted anyone to know. Her primary backing came from a silent investor named Richard Chun, a semi-retired venture capitalist with a reputation for ruthless business practices. He provided the initial capital expansion after my mother's trust fund, but recent filings showed tension. Loan extensions, delayed payments, carefully worded amendments to their partnership agreement. I found Richard's contact information in a public business directory. He had no idea who Eli Parker was. Why would he? I'd been a child when Diane started her company, but I knew everything about him. His investment history, his past business failures, his tendency to cut losses brutally when partnerships soured. This was Diane's weakness. Her empire was built on borrowed money and borrowed time, not on genuine stability or loyal partnerships. And that's when my plan truly crystallized. I didn't need to attack her directly. I just needed to remove the supports holding her up. I approached Richard Chin's office 6 months later under a carefully constructed identity. Parker Consulting, Financial Analysis, and Risk Assessment. The business cards were professionally printed. The website was sleek and legitimate looking. The references were real consultants I'd done freelance work for who agreed to vouch for my analytical skills. None of them knew my real target. Richard's assistant called me back within a week. Mr. Chun is interested in your services. He'd like to discuss auditing one of his property development investments. I met him at his downtown office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Richard was in his 60s, sharp-eyed and impatient, the kind of man who'd built his fortune by trusting numbers over people. Parker Properties, he said without preamble, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. I want to know if my investment is solid or if I'm being fed fantasy projections. He studied me carefully. Can you be discreet? I met his gaze steadily. I specialize in discretion, Mr. Chun. You'll have a full analysis within 3 weeks. He never connected the dots. Why would he? Parker was a consultant. Eli Parker was a ghost from Diane's past. Besides, Parker is a common enough name. Over the next 2 weeks, I dove into Parker Properties' financial records with legitimate access provided by Richard's partnership rights. What I found was even worse than I'd hoped. The evidence I uncovered was damning enough to collapse Diane's entire operation. Inflated property valuations that couldn't withstand professional appraisal. Forged inspection reports that claimed buildings were move-in ready when they needed substantial repairs. Invoices from phantom contractors that Richard had paid, but who'd never actually performed work. The money had disappeared into offshore accounts, carefully laundered through a web of shell companies. Most devastating of all, I found proof that the initial startup capital, my mother's trust fund, had been obtained through forged documents. Diane had convinced my grieving father to sign papers supposedly for estate management that actually transferred my inheritance entirely to her control. In any court, this would be fraud. But I didn't go to court. Not yet. Instead, I compiled everything into a detailed report for Richard, complete with bank statements, forged signatures, and projected losses if the schemes continued. Then I sent him one additional document anonymously from an untraceable email account. The subject line read, "You deserve to know where your money actually goes." Inside was a deeper analysis showing exactly how much Diane had stolen, not just from him, but from my mother's estate. I sent on a Friday evening. Then I waited. Monday morning arrived with the first crack in Diane's perfect facade. I positioned myself across the street from Parker Properties' downtown office in a coffee shop with large windows, laptop open, ostensibly working on consulting reports. At 9:15, Richard Chin's Mercedes pulled aggressively into the parking lot. He stormed into the building, his face red even from a distance. Through the glass office windows, I watched Diane's expression transform from confusion to alarm. She stood behind her desk, hands raised defensively, while Richard clearly shouted. Papers flew. A coffee mug shattered against the wall. Within 30 minutes, 3 more people arrived, including what looked like Richard's attorney based on the briefcase and stern expression. The meeting lasted 4 hours. When Richard finally left, his face was stone. Diane stood at her office window, phone pressed to her ear, and even from across the street, I could see her hand shaking. She made call after call, her body language growing more frantic with each one. For once in her carefully controlled life, Diane looked small, vulnerable, frightened. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the chaos unfold. This was just the beginning. I wasn't anywhere near done. 2 months after Richard's explosive visit, Diane hosted a massive charity gala at the Grand Hotel, clearly attempting to rehabilitate her image and prove her business was stable. The ballroom glittered with champagne fountains and ice sculptures, society's elite dressed in designer gowns and expensive suits. I purchased a ticket as a donor under my consulting company name, wearing a tailored tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Diane was working the room like a desperate politician, all bright smiles and air kisses, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. She didn't recognize me initially when I approached her near the silent auction table. Why would she? The last time she'd seen me, I was a skinny, defeated 14-year-old. Now I was a man in my 20s, confident and expensively dressed. "Mrs. Parker," I said smoothly, extending my hand. "Wonderful event." She turned, her practiced smile in place, then froze. The champagne flute in her other hand trembled slightly. "Eli." Her voice came out as a whisper. I raised my own glass in a mock toast, my smile not reaching my eyes. "To new beginnings," I said, echoing her words from that birthday party a decade ago. Her face went pale beneath her makeup. The morning after the gala, Parker Properties' senior accountant, a man named Douglas Martin who'd worked for Diane since the beginning, submitted his resignation effective immediately. The news hit the local business wire by 10 a.m. By noon, a reporter from the Business Journal had started asking questions about financial irregularities at Parker Properties. By 3 p.m., Diane was on the local news channel, standing in front of her office building, her makeup perfect but her eyes wild. "These allegations are completely unfounded," she declared to the cameras, her voice too high, too defensive. "Parker Properties maintains the highest standards of financial transparency and business ethics." She jabbed her finger at the reporter asking questions. "This is clearly a targeted smear campaign by jealous competitors who can't stand to see a woman succeed in a male-dominated industry." I watched the broadcast from my apartment, a glass of scotch in my hand, my expression perfectly neutral except for one small detail, the slight upward curve at the corner of my mouth. A smile so subtle it barely existed, but it was there. She still had no idea I was the architect of her unraveling. She thought this was random misfortune, competitive sabotage, anything but the methodical revenge of the boy she'd thrown away. Tomorrow would bring more revelations. But tonight, I savored this moment of watching her scramble, watching her perfect control slip degree by degree. The accountant's resignation had been my doing. The reporter's questions came from an anonymous tip I'd provided. Every piece was moving exactly where I needed it. My father called my cell phone at 11 p.m., 3 days after Diane's news appearance. I almost didn't answer, seeing his name on the screen after so many years of silence. But curiosity won. "Eli." His voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and broken. "She's saying you're behind all this. Behind the investigation, the audits, everything falling apart." I paused, sitting in my dark apartment with only the city lights visible through the window. Behind what exactly? A long silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, uneven and shaky. "She took everything," he finally said, and now he was crying, actual sobs distorting his words. "Everything, Eli. The house is mortgaged beyond its value. My retirement accounts are empty. She even used my name on loans I never knew about." He paused, collecting himself slightly. "I was so stupid. I let her do it because I was afraid of being alone after your mother died." Another pause. "She told me cutting you off would make you stronger. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because I was weak." I stared at the phone, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. Just a vast, cold emptiness. "Yes," I said simply. "You were weak." Then I hung up. He called back 6 times. I didn't answer. The federal audit came down 4 weeks later, triggered by multiple complaints and suspicious financial activity reports. IRS agents, accompanied by federal investigators, arrived at Parker Properties with boxes and search warrants. They spent 3 days combing through every file, every computer, every scrap of financial documentation. I watched from my usual coffee shop across the street as they carried out boxes of evidence. Diane's personal and business accounts were frozen pending investigation. The trust fund's paper trail, led directly back to her fraudulent manipulation of estate documents and forged authorizations. Every stolen dollar was now documented, tagged, and preserved as evidence. Local news covered it as a developing scandal. Local real estate developer under federal investigation. The business community buzzed with speculation and schadenfreude. Richard Chun released a terse statement through his attorney, saying he was cooperating with investigators and had severed all business ties with Parker Properties. Other investors followed like dominoes. Within a week, Parker Properties' office building was empty except for lawyers and forensic accountants. The company was effectively dead, just waiting for the autopsy report to make it official. My mother's trust fund, what remained of it after Diane's spending, was identified as stolen property and placed in escrow. I was contacted by investigators as the rightful heir. They apologized for what had happened, treating me like a victim rather than the architect of the entire investigation. Diane showed up at my consulting office on a gray Tuesday afternoon 6 weeks after the federal audit began. My assistant buzzed me from the front desk, her voice uncertain. "There's a woman here to see you. She won't give her name, but she's very insistent." I knew who it was before I stood up. When my office door opened, Diane walked in looking like a ghost of her former self. No makeup could hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her designer suit hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight too quickly. Her hand shook as she closed the door behind her. "You," she said, her voice raw. "You did this. All of this." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down, Diane." She collapsed into it like her legs couldn't support her anymore. "You don't understand, Eli. It was just business. The trust fund was just sitting there doing nothing. I turned it into something real, something profitable." I leaned back in my chair, my expression neutral. "No, Diane. It was theft. You forged documents, manipulated a grieving man, and stole a child's inheritance." My voice was calm, almost gentle. "You built an empire on a foundation of lies and stolen money." She started crying, ugly, desperate sobs. "Please, they're going to press charges. I could go to prison. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave permission." I pressed the button under my desk that alerted security. "No." She looked up, mascara streaking down her face. "What?" "No." I repeated. "You taught me that nothing is free. You taught me that everything has a price. Consider this your tuition payment." 2 security officers appeared at the door. "Please escort Mrs. Parker from the building," I said quietly. They did. She screamed my name all the way to the elevator. In the legal chaos that followed, I quietly filed a claim through my mother's estate, properly represented by a top-tier law firm I could now afford. The case was straightforward given the federal investigation's findings. Diane had obtained control of the trust fund through fraudulent means. I was the rightful heir, and I was entitled to full restitution. The court approved my claim within 2 months. Diane didn't contest it. She couldn't afford to, not with criminal charges pending and her assets frozen. The amount returned to me was significant, though less than the original trust fund value after Diane's expenditures. But it was enough, more than enough. My attorney also helped me file for the return of my mother's jewelry, which Diane had sold years earlier. Most pieces were never recovered, but 3 significant items were traced to a collector who agreed to sell them back when he learned their history. My mother's engagement ring, her grandmother's pearl necklace, and a gold locket with my baby picture inside. When I held them again for the first time in over a decade, I allowed myself one moment of raw emotion. I sat in my attorney's office with these pieces of my mother's life in my hands and wept. Not for revenge accomplished or justice served, but for the mother I'd lost and the boy I'd been before Diane taught me that family could be betrayal. Parker Properties officially dissolved 3 months after the federal investigation began. The company's assets were liquidated to pay debts and legal fees. Diane's personal bankruptcy filing made the newspapers with less fanfare than her initial success story. Just a small column in the business section noting another failed venture. She went from penthouse offices and charity galas to bankruptcy court and criminal proceedings. The same tabloids and business journals that had once praised her innovative approach and business acumen now called her a cautionary tale about greed and fraud. Her trial was scheduled for 6 months out. The prosecutor was seeking significant prison time given the premeditated nature of the fraud and the vulnerability of the victims. My father filed for divorce and moved into a modest apartment, his own finances destroyed by Diane's schemes. He tried to contact me several times through various channels. I ignored every attempt. The man who'd stood silent while she destroyed me didn't deserve my forgiveness or my time. Whatever relationship we might have salvaged died the day he chose her over his own son. Some betrayals are simply too fundamental. I rebuilt my mother's charitable foundation using her name, not mine. The Lydia Trust focused on providing scholarships and support for teenagers who'd been abandoned or cut off by their families, kids like I'd been. We funded boarding school educations, provided mentorship programs, offered emergency assistance for housing and basic needs. When people asked about the name during the foundation's launch event, I simply said, Lydia Parker believed in fairness and second chances. This foundation honors her memory by helping young people who need both. I hired Ms. Rodriguez, my old high school counselor who'd helped me escape, as the foundation's director. She cried when I offered her the position. "You were always special, Eli," she said. "I knew you'd do something meaningful with your life." I donated anonymously to Marcus Chin's mother, who'd given me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. She received a check for $50,000 with a note that said simply, "Thank you for your kindness to a boy who needed it. You saved his life." The foundation grew steadily, helping dozens of teenagers in its first year alone. Every scholarship granted, every life changed, felt like another piece of my mother's legacy restored. This was what her money should have done all along: create opportunities, not fund a thief's empire. One evening, 3 years after Diane's arrest and 2 years into her prison sentence, I visited the park where my mother used to take me when I was young. The same bench overlooking the pond where we'd fed ducks and talked about everything and nothing. The sunset hit the water in shades of soft gold and deep amber. My phone buzzed with a message from my father. "I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry for everything." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies come too late, cost too little, mean too much and too little simultaneously. The ducks paddled peacefully across the water, oblivious to human drama. A young couple walked past, holding hands and laughing. Life continued its ordinary patterns while my extraordinary revenge had played out in courtrooms and headlines. I thought about Diane in prison, about my father alone in his small apartment, about the empire that had crumbled because I'd been patient enough to wait and smart enough to strike precisely. She taught me to live without love, thinking it would break me. Instead, I'd learned to be steel. She taught me that family was conditional, that affection could be weaponized. I learned to build my own family from mentors and friends and the people I chose rather than the blood relations I was born with. And ultimately, I taught her a far more valuable lesson. Power built on theft and lies eventually collapses under the weight of its own corruption. I stood up from the bench, breathing in the evening air, feeling strangely at peace. The boy who'd been cast out at 14 was gone, replaced by a man who'd reclaimed everything stolen from him and built something better from the ruins. The sunset faded to twilight, and I walked away from the park toward whatever came next, finally free.